Most of my life, was in New York City, and I am the youngest sibling. I have two older siblings, a sister who's 5 years older and a brother who's 7 years older. My parents growing up were together until I was about 9. They got a divorce and they had a really messy divorce. But even growing up, we had a very not so atypical family structure where we lived with our mom full-time in New York City, and then our dad didn't love living in the city, so he lived at our country house, like an hour outside the city most of the time, and he would come into the city for like a night, a week, and then go back out to the country, and then we'd go to the country on the weekend. And so I feel like I grew up with this mix of very urban life, New York City, the hustle, the bustle, the cement, and then also was very connected to the country and greenery and farm life and animals and nature. And I mean, God, there's so many different directions I can go in.
So one I wanted to hit on, living with divorced parents.
Yeah.
Because I have friends now who are my age, and maybe we'll talk about marriage later, but they are contemplating divorce with kids. So from your perspective, someone who as a child went through divorce, I've seen two different theories. One theory is it's better that if there's discourse between the husband and wife, it's better that they split so the kids don't see that versus them staying together, hating each other, but staying together for the kids.
Yeah.
So looking back on the experience that you had, do you think that was the best decision they made to split? Or do you think it would have been worse if they stayed together for the kids? Or is it good that because each situation isn't great.
Yeah.
Right? When they don't love each other. But
I mean, I think it's hard to generalize. I think one thing that I've learned as an adult who doesn't have kids yet, who's married, who has siblings who has kids, who has a lot of friends who have kids now. One of the things that I think is that like kids, like growing up with divorced parents isn't a bad thing. I think it just depends on how mature the parents are. They able to co-parent well together, which includes a lot of skills, communication skills. And I think one of the biggest things is like learning how to demonstrate repair for kids, because we see ruptures all the time. We see people getting angry and having fights and having discussions and not getting along, but we don't necessarily as kids see modeling for repair. So when I think back to my childhood, I don't think like, they should. I mean, they kind of, again, already had a weird living situation, right, where my dad wasn't in the house 24/7. So when they got divorced, it wasn't like, where'd daddy go, But I would say like the biggest thing is like growing up with parents that can actually get along. And my parents, once they divorced, did not get along. And that was really hard for my siblings and I, because it put us in the middle.
Would they try to get you to like take sides, or they try to like say mean things?
Yeah, I remember like watching an Oprah show, back in the day when she had her like 4 p.m. slot. I believe it was ABC. And I remember she had this episode where it was like, divorced parents, like when you say something bad to the child about the other parent, you're actually saying something bad about them because they are a piece of that other parent. And I remember just feeling so seen by Oprah as this like, 9-year-old, whatever it was, 10-year-old. And when my parents did do a lot of bickering about the other person behind her back, or there was also some things that they weren't being fully transparent with us about their divorce to probably try to protect us. It came out in sideways ways that like, as a kid, you had a lot of questions, and you were trying to get oriented about what's happening. And so when conversations would get brought up, you know, when I was with my dad, being like, Dad, why did you say this to the judge in the court, you know? And he's then defending himself. And then I'm going to my mom and being like, well, Dad said this, like, what really happened here? And, you know, that was not,
Right.
that was not great.
That's not a loving.
That is not a helpful way to divorce, because that puts a lot of strain on the kids. And and that's unfortunate. I think that is present in a lot of families. And, you know, again, not being a parent, but I can imagine like being separated and learning how to co-parent is like a whole next level of communication, because you're like now separated from this person that you did one day love and was in a in-depth romantic relationship with, and now have to kind of be friends with them, even though you don't really maybe want to be friends with them. Sometimes maybe you do, but you know, the relationship has changed.
For sure. So, but the one thing that sometimes I think we forget as adults, that kids can be resilient.
Mm-hmm.
They are resilient. And sometimes we forget that part of it.
Yes, 100%.
And we'll get a little more into how it affected you when you got older. But another thing I like to drill in on is I have 3 boys and a daughter. And so when I talk to a lot of guests and I'll ask them, like, especially the male guests, it's like, oh, what did you do when you were a kid? I played sports. I did this kind of stuff. And then I'll ask my female guests and they're like, I didn't do anything.
Oh, really?
Like I had an 8-year-old guest and I was like, so what did you do when you were a kid? Because back then the boys could play sports. And she's like, I don't even remember.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what did you do as a child? Did you play with that age gap, 5 years is kind of big, where I don't know how, like when she was 11, did she really want to hang out with you at 6 or play? I'm curious.
Yeah, I did have so my sister was 5 and then my brother was 7 from me. So they were 2 years apart.
Yeah,
and so
closer.
They were and they weren't. I think they were closer when like they were younger. And then when I kind of came into the picture, I think I would play with both of them. But when I was younger, I was like put in gymnastics. I was put in dance class. I did ballet until I was probably 6, and then started doing jazz dance until I was 14, and then transitioned to Pilates. Yeah, so like, you know, I was busy in New York City. I mean, God, it's a whole nother story these days, but like New York City, like kids are scheduled. Mm-hmm. Like you have their, you know, activities, probably too scheduled. But I also played a lot. I loved playing by myself. I had dolls that I would play with. I'd play, you know.
Yeah, I'll go and see my daughter and she's playing with her Barbies and stuff like that.
Yeah, like school teacher, I played that I was the owner of a fashion magazine called 411 Fashion, and I also had, you know, a husband and family, and like, you know, so I loved like being by myself and playing as well. We didn't have technology to really keep us busy. Also, my family, we didn't have cable until I want to say I was like 13. So limited channels to watch.
Yeah. I want to get in on let's talk about the dancing part and because when I look at sports, like when you play team sport, you're learning how to rely on your teammates. So looking back on your dancing career, what are some of the things that you learned from dancing?
Oh, what an interesting question. I think one of the biggest things looking back is like being in my body, learning to move my body, being conscious, like this is how I can move my ribs, you know. I think that mind-body awareness was huge then. And then also learning how to perform, like being on stage and in front of a crowd.
Was that kind of dancing, is it more of an individual sport or a group sport?
Yeah, I would say individual. I mean, you have to learn your steps. You're not necessarily in charge of like the girl to the right of you and how she performs her steps. But obviously there's like synergy within the group class. But I was never like besties with the people in my dance class. I don't think there was that same like collaborative energy that you get when you join a sports team.
Yeah, like you can get a really good camaraderie on a sports team.
Yeah.
You didn't get that experience.
I didn't have that. Yeah, I never really got into soccer. I had some girlfriends growing up that did. Yeah, it was definitely more in individualistic like sports. And then when I got into like Pilates when I was 14, and then I loved going to the gym, you know.
So I have an idea of what Pilates is, but what is that?
Yeah, so Pilates was, and Pilates has transformed, I would say, also in the last few years. It's blown up,
Yeah.
and it's kind of lost its like core principles. But Pilates was created by a man named Joseph Pilates, and it is all about core strength, like moving your body from your core. But your core isn't like your six-pack abs. Your core is like connecting from your hips to your shoulder blades and learning how to move your spine and stabilize your spine and really connect to all of these smaller, deeper muscles that are in our, what's called your powerhouse in Pilates.
So they're not trying to get big muscles.
But you do get really strong in Pilates because you're learning how to stabilize and strengthen these connecting muscles.
So it's different than yoga, because I think a lot of times people group those things together.
Oh my God. Do you know how many times, because I also teach meditation, people are like, oh, how's yoga teaching? And I'm like, it's Pilates, you know?
Yeah.
Because I became a Pilates teacher later on.
So I think a lot of people just group those things together.
Yes.
Same thing with like bodybuilding and powerlifting are very different sports.
Yeah.
You do them differently.
Yeah, exactly. And Pilates, you know, has transitioned. There are different types of Pilates, just like there's different types of yoga. And so I would say right now, what we typically see out there in the world within the Pilates is like modern Pilates. Because Joseph created a system that you do exercises in an order. He's not alive, no.
So when did this come out?
He developed, oh my God, I want to say around, blanking on the dates, I want to say it was in like the 30s.
Oh, okay, so it's been around.
Yeah, been around for a long time. And what's amazing is like he created all these like apparatuses with Pilates. So he worked a lot with dancers, and he worked a lot with, I can share with you a really great podcast that gives a little bit more history of Pilates, because I don't remember it right now. But anyway, he's a really amazing man that developed the system of how to use and connect to our body.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's like a lot of, I'm a guy that likes frameworks, and every framework you're always going to find some issue with. And when people say, what's the best exercise? Just pick one and do it, right? Now, if you're trying to optimize for something, right? If you're trying to become a really good runner and you're weightlifting, that's probably, you're not optimized. So if you have a specific goal, then you want to optimize your exercise around that. But there is no only way to exercise. There's no right way, one way.
No, and I've actually tried to drop the language of exercise from my vocabulary and just talk about movement.
Yeah.
Because I think when we look at like this body we get to live in is such a gift, and that how can we move it? Because it wants to be moved. It's an animal, you know, it's not meant to be sitting in a chair all day like we're being caged into in the modern day world. And so whether that's like getting out for a walk or a run or a bike ride or stretching or dance classes or doing some sort of sports or weightlifting, like it, listening to the body, which I'm sure we're going to talk lots about, but listening to the body and how it wants to move, I think is the most powerful thing we can do for our well-being.
Yeah, I like that. So, so you did dance. So you kept busy with certain different things. Then you transitioned. Tell me about what high school life was like. If you could go back and maybe towards the end of your high school years, we'll talk about advice you'd give to that version of yourself. But what's it like being a high school girl? Because I'll never be a high school girl. So.
Well, I would even like go back to like middle school.
Okay.
Before we go to high school, because I think middle school was harder for me than high school. Like 7th, 8th grade, even though I was part of like the more popular girls and clique, that's where I was mean girled for the first time. And like that shit is scarring, and that shit has stayed with me. And I really learned also and like grew from that experience. But like that age group where you're gossiping about each other behind your back and you feel so insecure about your friendships and your place and like picking on each other.
Why do you think girls do that?
It's a really good question. I don't know. I think like there's a part of like probably social conditioning where we're like have been taught from movies and media and maybe even like seeing our moms or our mom's friends, like how they're connecting, like that sense of competing with one another, I think starts really young.
How would I homeschool my kids, so because of that, they're not exposed to as much things. But like one thing I'm trying to teach my kids is you can opt out of social games. And so like they do interact with other kids, whether it's church or YMCA or whatever. And so like you don't have to participate in bullying, right? You can actually I joke with my kids, you can bully the bully. You better not be bullying kids that are whatever. And so feedback I get from other adults and strangers, they say my kids are great. I think parents are biased towards their kids. And I mean, if a parent asks for my honest feedback, I'll tell them little Billy's not an angel. He's opposite, right? But most parents aren't willing to let someone else say that to them.
Yeah.
And I have a few friends that they let me, I'll be like, bro, let me tell you straight.
Yeah.
But they're not ready for that. But so like my daughter's 8, she's, not quite in middle school, but like how do I save her from that? Or how can I get her to not have to participate? Because even if someone is being mean or aggressive towards her, you don't have to play the game.
Yeah. Well, I think
it's harder when you're in school because it's like you got to go to school.
Yeah, you're not there to protect her. I mean, there's I think a couple elements of one. I think Dr. Becky, who's like a childhood psychologist, talks.
Yeah, I listen to her a lot.
Okay, she talks a lot about this, about like helping your children build resiliency, which I think is really important. You can do that through having conversations and having helping them work through some of the challenges that they hopefully feel comfortable enough to bring to you. Like, hey, Susie like told me my dress was really ugly today, and to slow down and be like, well, how did that make you feel when she said that, and helping her gain the language to be like, yeah, that didn't feel good, and talking through like, okay, well, what did you say to her? Right. And talking through, not making it necessarily right or wrong, but helping her learn from her experiences. And I think the biggest thing is like, you can't protect her for life, right? So you want to help her have tools of how she can start to figure this stuff out. And to be honest, as painful, this goes back to your point earlier about resiliency as kids, like as painful as that moment was when I was mean girled in 7th grade, it taught me how horrible it is that I don't want to do that to anybody else. Like I learned at the age of 12, like gossiping is not something I want to engage in. So, we can be told gossiping's not a good thing, but there's then a felt sense when you actually feel it that I think can help you realize like that lesson and integrate it into your life. So, yeah, those would be some of my pieces of advice of how to.
Yeah, because as an adult, I look back and it's like, you just don't have to participate. Someone else can do all the whatever, and you can choose not to engage in that. And it's easier to say as an adult, but like when you're a kid and you're going through it, even my daughter can feel that with the boys. If they say something to her that, if they say it to each other, they're like whatever. But if they say it to her, they can say the same thing to her, and she may start crying because she feels. And I don't want to invalidate her, right? Because it's like, you are a woman, you are created differently, and you deal with emotions differently, right? And I understand my wife better now that I have a daughter, because it's like, my wife will be like, why should you do that? I'm like, that's what you used to. Like, you could just wake up and that's like, whatever. And that's great. Like, I don't want to say that's bad. I want to say that's just that's what makes you a woman. And that's amazing. And so as a father, I want to teach them that emotions are healthy and good, but not necessarily letting them control you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lifelong lesson to
Yeah.
learn how to name your emotions, but not let them rock you,
Yeah.
you know, and let them inform you, but not rock you. I mean, to that place of, it also takes a lot of self-worth, self-confidence, self-esteem for someone to stay in their own body sense of self when somebody's criticizing, you know, or bullying or giving that feedback. So that is a practice, and that is, I think, a constant. I don't think you're ever there,
Right.
you know.
There's some things in life you have to continue to work on.
Yeah.
Like even like a neighbor boy.
Rupture repair, rupture repair.
A neighbor boy called her ugly one time. And it's like one thing that you said earlier was like her self-worth, and it's like right now she's getting validated from us as the parent. So we're hoping if someone like that says something, she knows that what dad has to say is more meaningful when with this, because all that stranger or that neighbor's, he probably has issues, so he's taking it out on her because she's very beautiful, right? So yeah, it's interesting, you know, helping me as a father. I want to help my daughter navigate through all that. So middle school is rough.
Middle school is rough.
A lot of people tend to say that, and sometimes it's hormones, sometimes it's. Do you think that's when did you notice beauty makes a difference or matters, or was that something that was like maybe they were threatened by you because of your beauty or your attractiveness, so that's part of it? Or
Since I have an older sister, 5 years older, you know, she went through puberty way before me. She also had big boobs growing up. I obviously never had big boobs growing up. And so I would hear from her and from the boys at school and from kids in my grade and kids in her grade, you know, all the like chit chat around that. And so that was like a first signal of like, oh, looks matter, right? Your body matters. But also, you know, I'm getting that messaging from media, from celebrities, from, you know, red carpets, from like all the things that I'm ingesting as a young kid. Yeah. And I mean, I look back at photos and I mean, as everybody does, right? And they're like, I look like that in middle school. Like, how did my mom let me leave you know, I was wearing like belly shirts. I dyed my hair red when I was younger. My mom kind of had a rule of thumb of like, no tattoos, no piercings. But you can do whatever you want to your hair because your hair grows back.
Yeah, and that's something you can easily adjust.
Yeah.
Versus a tattoo, it's not like you can erase it.
Right. Or like belly pierce. Like my brother, when he was younger, he wanted to get his belly button pierced.
Interesting.
And my mom was like, no way.
Usually girls do that. I don't know, realize.
You know, this is back in like the 90s. Yeah. But like I had to wait till I was 10 to get my ears pierced. You know, where some kids when they're 6 months old get their ears pierced, right? So yeah, I mean, I look back at that, I'm like, how did I rock all of that? But you know, you braces, like all of those things.
Yeah. So you did some growing up in middle school, dealt with some of that negativity, and then what was your high school years like?
So high school, I went to a high school that, so back up for a second. So middle school was very small. It was a private school in New York City, very progressive. I was close with all of my teachers. It was a diverse group of people, like loved it. Some of the most, even though it was hard in those like 7th, 8th grade, it was very nourishing. So high school, I went to school that kind of had a similar vibe, very progressive. It was a private school in New York. I think I had like 40 kids in my grade, which
small
exactly blows people's mind when they grew up with like 400.
Yeah.
And we didn't have walls as part of the school structures, like partitions. So again, it blows people's minds. So it's very like hippy dippy progressive. We call our teachers by their first name. So I went into high school kind of with a similar environment, but yet new kids. I knew 2 kids that traveled with me from my previous school, and everybody else was new. And everybody else in that high school most of them had been with each other since they were 3. So I was coming into this whole new group of people. And there was some mean girling like some like who does this new girl, cute new girl think she is? Like there was kind of some of that energy. I was getting attention from older boys and sophomores and juniors, and it took a little while to adjust, but I feel like I had a pretty smooth entry point. I started dating a junior, I don't remember when, and maybe like second semester, freshman year. Mm-hmm. And we stayed together for like the rest of my high school experience.
So, hitting on that topic, dating, here's my advice to myself or whatever. My senior year of high school, mm-hmm. Was when I had an opportunity to like date and all that stuff. And I wish someone would have told me, just because you have emotion for someone doesn't mean you have to act upon it. And so I wish someone could have
impulse control.
It's not even impulse, because it wasn't like I wanted to like sleep with them. It was just more like, just because it's biological to be attracted to some person. Like I'm not saying that's bad. That's biological. Like if we didn't have any attraction to people, we wouldn't procreate, right? And so I did have like a counselor friend that I was friends with, but I look back on that year and I had so much emotional turmoil over this girl that I kind of liked but didn't like, and we never should have dated. It was just, I look back and my senior year could have been so much better if someone just been like, hey, Josiah, it's normal for you to, because I remember like the texting and the writing the letters and just like this emotional turmoil of like, I think we knew at the end of the day we shouldn't have dated, but like, but our heart says elsewise. And if someone just would be like, hey, Josiah, it's normal for you to have feelings for someone, but you don't actually have to do anything about it. And then I felt like my senior year would have been a lot better from the emotional standpoint, versus it was just so much emotional turmoil over what should we do about our feelings and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Or would you say,
I mean, that makes sense, right? As a hormonal teenager, it's like takes over you. Yeah.
Like, would you, like, when you dated your freshman year, would you want your daughter to date like that? Or would you, I guess, what advice would you give her? Like, another thing, like, what I would tell any girl, but especially if you're a pretty girl, you're going to get interest. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not going to be an issue. Just because a guy is interested in you doesn't mean you have to you don't have to reciprocate that. Yeah. Right? I think my daughter will be very beautiful. I'm sure she is, and I can only imagine as she gets older. And it's like, that's probably one thing I'm going to teach her. Like, you're going to have plenty of options. Just because some guy says hi to you doesn't mean, and I think some girls feel like they have to do that.
I think that's a great lesson to have in general, whether you're in high school or older in life. Like, just because somebody shows interest in you doesn't mean you have to show interest back. Mm-hmm. Like, to know yourself enough about what you want and what you like and what you don't like to see if that person's right for you. I think at a young age, like in high school, I didn't know what that was, And there've been some boys here and there, but none that clicked. And I don't look back with any regret. Like, I wish we didn't date, or I wish we didn't date as long. We had a really meaningful relationship, There was like a person I lost my virginity to, and I'm grateful that it was like with somebody who I really cared about and who cared about me, and it was safe, versus you hear these other stories of how a lot of people lose their virginity. Is somebody that
not a great experience.
Yeah, not a great experience, or it's not
an older guy taking advantage of a girl.
Yeah, or like they were just somebody that they want to, they want to check off the box before going to college, or like whatever it is, right? So I definitely don't look back at that. I think if I was a parent, I just would want to make sure they're happy and that, they are into this person, that it's not just because they feel special that this person likes them.
Yeah. That's just my, like, as my boys get older, I think they're not as, because they have a sister, girls aren't as fast. Like, when you talk to boys that don't have, the only female they know is their mom, then girls are this strange alien being. But because they have a sister, they're like, girls, what's that? But again, they're still, puberty hasn't kicked in yet, so they're not getting that. So that'll be interesting to see what the next few years
Yeah.
look like and how that affects them. But
Yeah.
I want, for me, it's like, I want them to have healthy relationships with both parties, male and female. But I probably won't. Anytime you tell a hard no to a kid, they usually want to do the opposite, right? Don't do this. Oh, I'm going to go do that, right? So for me, it's more of just having those conversations with them, like, hey, you can be friends with all these people, but I don't know if you necessarily have to like romantically get involved. So I don't know. I still have to think through that as they get older, and we work that out with them. But
Yeah, and I think there's having like one of the things I think my mom did really well as a parent was she put so much trust in us that we never then wanted to do something that was going to disappoint
you
her.
feel like you had to rebel.
Yeah, none of my siblings and I, even though we had some rough moments in our life where we could have easily gone off the deep ends,
Yeah.
which we'll talk about. Like none of us have rebelled. And I think that level of trust also made us smart to like consider our options. I also in high school, was drinking, and especially growing up in New York City, I had a fake ID when I was, I don't know, however old, like going to places, like doing things that when I got to college, then people, because I went to University of Michigan, there was a lot of people from middle America there, like who had never drank or, had never had a fake ID until getting to college or like whatever it is. And so I look back and I feel really grateful that, again, I had these experiences, like semi-adulting experiences at a younger age in a safer container, so that when I did get older and my container got bigger, I trusted how to navigate it more.
So experiences like that, would you say that's just a part of growing up? Underage drinking, fake IDs. That's just like I would not want my kids doing that, but at the same time, you're saying like, hey, it's
gonna happen. I mean, supposedly kids these days, Gen Z, and I don't even know like what the next generation below that is called, but like what I'm hearing is they're not into drinking as much as millennials were.
A lot of them aren't even getting into driving. They're not like.
Well, I don't blame them from that. I don't. Growing up in New York City, I didn't get my.
You didn't need to.
No.
Because you had public transportation.
Yeah.
The train system.
I mean, I got my license at 19, but I like still don't know how to drive really.
I didn't see your car.
We got rid of our car last October. We've just been on bikes.
Oh, wow.
Bikes and foot.
Yeah, I mean, where you're at, you can access almost everything.
Yeah.
You can always Uber.
Yeah.
If you're in a city, then it's like I can see it. Where I live in the suburb, it's like you're not getting anywhere. Like, good luck.
Yeah, wait an hour for a bus. Out in the suburbs.
Yeah.
There's like, yeah.
I thought you were like, you probably have buses all the time.
Oh, no. Yeah. There's a system here. I mean, again, being a New Yorker, I'm a little critical of the public transportation here.
Anything compared to New York City in America. I don't know if anyone has that. A lot of people complain about it, like the bums and the trains and all that other stuff. But at least there is some kind of public transportation versus here. It's not the best.
Yeah.
So another pivotal point in people's life is when they're leaving the home. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about in your growing up years? You said there were times you're getting it off the deep end, or you want to talk about that later?
Well, we can get into it a little here because so at this point in my life, my parents were divorced. At the age of 10, my mom was diagnosed with leukemia. And when I was in high school, I think I was a sophomore in high school, she had her first round of intensive chemo. And because my parents were divorced, my siblings and I were her main caretakers. And even though she was very self-sufficient and my mom never talked about her illness as an illness, it was always like, oh, I just have a little flu,
What did she do for work?
She was the founder of a law firm called Jacoby and Myers. And she was a busy powerhouse of a female entrepreneur, raising 3 kids in New York City. And And so that was really hard in high school because I never really felt like I could fully be a kid.
Yeah, that forces anytime a child has to take care of a parent, they're growing up instantly.
Yeah. So like having the divorce and then having this happen with my mom, a few years later. And I think that happened with sophomore year. And then my senior year, I was, in that whole college process, looking at schools and trying to tour schools. And my sister, or I guess this is my junior year, my sister who had just graduated from USC was back in New York, and she found a swollen lymph node in her neck right here. Like this place was completely swollen. And it was when we were on a college campus tour, I think somewhere in like Pennsylvania. She came along. Long story short, she was planning to move back to LA, and after going to the doctor, she found out that she was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. So then my senior year, so that was over senior summer, my senior year of high school, she was going through chemotherapy as I was looking at colleges. And that was really intense. Like one of her best friends, childhood best friends, who's her age, so 21, just passed away from testicular cancer. She was diagnosed with cancer. My mom her hair was just growing back from like.
So it sounds like your mom didn't make a full recovery.
Well, my mom was in remission at that point, and her hair was, growing back at this point. But I just mean it was so fresh when then my sister needed to go through chemotherapy, and she got healthy and well. But that's kind of the energy that I left home in, was like, wow, health is really important. Am I allowed to curse?
It doesn't bother me.
Okay, I won't.
Yeah.
I won't. Health is really important, and I was going to drop an F-bomb there, but I won't. And that was the energy that was going off to college. And I went to University of Michigan. That it's a big party school, big party school, yet really smart school. So it like had that balance of energy, but it. Again, like I wasn't going in thinking like, I want to go buck wild. Like I remember meeting somebody at like some mixer, and I was like, oh, like, I think he was a senior at that time. And I was like, how has college been? He's like, oh, it's amazing. It's the best years of your life, kind of talking about it. I was like, did you get to go abroad? Like, did you study abroad? And he was like, no, like, why would I study abroad when you only get 4 years of college? And I had the complete opposite vision for myself in college. I was like, I'm going to college so that I can go study abroad.
Yeah.
Like, I was so excited for that part of the experience and just to live life knowing that that life is short and our health matters, and like everybody's sitting there just drinking beer and going to football games, and I was like getting up in the morning to go to a spin class and then meeting everybody at the tailgate.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people, they don't realize how important health is until it's usually too late. It's never too late to turn your health around, but
or they think, and when you're a kid,
a lot of damage is done.
You think you're invincible.
Right.
And also if you don't have modeling when you're a kid of how to take care of yourself, it's also really hard to understand. And I'll be like, my family is very healthy. Like we eat very, really well. My mom was doing yoga before people knew what yoga was. She's a swimmer. Like, so for her to get diagnosed with cancer, like it wasn't because she wasn't healthy.
Yeah.
And the same with my sister. She was a yoga teacher. She ate really healthy. She was active. And then, that brings me into like my story of when I was studying abroad then in my junior year of college. I was in Argentina and found a swollen lymph node on my neck in a different spot. And it hurt. And I was like, what is this? So I went to the doctor in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, talking them in Spanglish. And the doctor's like, just take some ibuprofen and, come back if it keeps bothering you. And I thought like maybe I pulled something in the gym, So I took ibuprofen, didn't get better, kept growing, got bigger. My mom and sister actually came to visit me when I was studying abroad. And by this point, it got pretty big. My mom was like, oh, like, don't worry about it. Like, if it keeps bothering you, like, go back to the doctor, after our trip. And so it did. It kept bothering me. And
It's just funny that would have been her response, knowing that she and your sister had dealt with it.
my mom took things, she always tried to be positive,
Yeah.
And to try not to let things rattle her. And when I went back to the doctor and they were like, we took a CAT scan, or I got a MRI of my chest, and they saw that there were other lymph nodes in my chest that were swollen. The doctor said to me, based on your family history, this is probably cancerous, but we won't know until you get a biopsy. And I would recommend doing the biopsy back in the States. And I remember like leaving the doctor's office and walking through the streets of Buenos Aires back to my apartment, like hysterically crying. I didn't have a cell phone. Like I had one of those like T9 Nokia cell phones, so it's like I couldn't FaceTime anybody. I couldn't, I felt so alone. I hopped on Skype, so back when we were talking via Skype. And I told my mom, and she booked me a flight the next day back.
So you're like 20, 21?
So I'm 21. I just had my 21st birthday. She booked me a flight back to New York City, and I left half of my stuff in Buenos Aires at the apartment because I was like, I'm going to be back in 3 weeks because this is going to be nothing, and I get to just continue my life. So I came back to New York, went through a biopsy, went through a test to see if like it was still if anything was in my bone marrow, and I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma 2A, and 2A means like it's in your upper cavity, stage 2A, and that was the same type of cancer my sister had, same stage my sister had at the same age my sister was.
Have you ever researched into the cause?
So our family is in a study, but I have not heard anything from the study. I don't even know if its study is still being funded. There's supposedly that if your sibling has been diagnosed with Hodgkin's, you have a higher chance of getting Hodgkin's, but there's not research on why you get cancer. Our doctor thinks that there's something environmental that triggered something genetic.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's some sort of genetic thing.
Yeah.
But like, also, what were we exposed to that we're all getting cancer? My brother has been fine, knock on wood. He's in his 40s. So I then started going through 6 months of chemotherapy.
Can I pause you for a second? What was your relationship with your father at that point?
That's a great question. My dad has always been present, but on the outskirts, check in once every other week on the phone, update each other. So my dad was there hearing about all of this, but he wasn't a very active,
kind of like an uncle instead of a father,
participant. Yeah. And, he would always say, hey, I'm here if you need me, but he wasn't necessarily like, I'm coming in. Yeah. I'm coming to that doctor's appointment. I'm coming,
So he didn't even do any of that stuff.
No, and we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, my parents not talking, circling back to the divorce, like not having this amicable divorce, they didn't talk at all. So it's not like my mom was updating him on health information or vice versa. So again, fell on me as the communicator. And I began in June 2010, 6 months of chemo. Now the story gets even more intense because about a year prior, my mom, who still had leukemia, had to get a stem cell transplant because her leukemia was getting more aggressive. And 2009, stem cell technology was not as advanced as it is today. And what stem cell replacement is like essentially when they try to kill like all of your body's stem cells and replace with somebody else's to hope that it grows healthier cells.
Whose cells are they using?
Donor cells. And she didn't find a perfect match. So she found somebody that was like good enough that the doctors felt good enough about. So she did this really intense stem cell transplant over the summer of 2009, where my sister and I were in New York. She was in Boston at Dana-Farber doing this, which is like one of the best hospitals. And we were driving back and forth, as like young teen-year-olds taking care of our mom, not necessarily like having summer fun, love energy, that you think about as a young child. My brother was living in DC at the time, so he was coming up to Boston from DC. So it was a lot. And then for a year later, me to get diagnosed where my mom was not feeling well. Her stem cell transplant was not sticking as well as they had hoped. It was a lot.
It was a lot, for sure.
It was a lot for her. Like, obviously there's a lot for me, which I'm happy to talk about more of. But like, I have compassion for my mom. Like, here's a mom who has given her kids everything, who's worked so hard in life. And she has to see 2 children go through chemo and be like, WTF, So that happened in June. And that summer, like a month later, she needed to get like an extra dose of these donor cells. And she ended up getting what's called graft versus host, which is when the donor cells start attacking your body. And she ended up going into the ICU unit in August 2010. Meanwhile, I'm still in chemotherapy every other week. And
when you're doing that, your life's kind of on pause. You're not really able to focus on anything else at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I felt lucky that I didn't have to work. There's a lot of people I know who get diagnosed with cancer that are working part-time or have to keep working full-time. I was at a stage in my life where I didn't have to work and I could just focus on taking care of my health.
Did you think about death a lot at that point?
Well, totally, because, August 31st, my mom passed away.
Oh.
She passed away in the same hospital that I was getting treated in. And when she passed, it was like the world shattering. Like, it was more intense that she passed than I had just been diagnosed cancer. And I think partly because
how long did she fight that battle for?
She had leukemia for about 10 years. And she, I think when I was diagnosed, my sister had the same type of cancer 5 years prior, or 4 years prior, that I knew I was going to be okay because she was okay. Like, there was a little bit of like,
get some hope there.
Yeah, and it was a little bit of like, okay, I have the curable cancer. I wasn't diagnosed with something extra scary like a brain tumor or leukemia or some form of cancer that doesn't have as high of remission rate. So I had that in the back of my mind that I wasn't going to die, but at the same time, I just experienced death. And it completely, shook my world in many ways, not only losing like my mother, who was one of my best friends.
She was probably what, mid-40s?
She was 65.
65, okay.
She had me when she was 44.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, yeah, the math is off somewhere. I did the math wrong somewhere.
Yeah, well, she was on the older scale. And that, like, wake up call of like how short our life is and how precious our time is just opened my eyes to how to try to live in a different rhythm, a rhythm that like I'd see everybody around me living. And it kind of looks like everybody's sleepwalking, like, sometimes hitting them in the face, be like, do you know how precious like your breath is right now, your body is, your health, your day, your time here. So that was, yeah, my 21st year of life.
So I want to keep going into that story, but I want to go down a slight rabbit trail. I've never had to deal with. I've obviously have known people that have passed away, but none that have been so personal to me. And so I have a colleague of mine. She's had a couple significant bad things happen to her, in a span of 2 years. One, she didn't lose her whole house, but her garage got on fire. And if you're living at a home, the home's supposed to be a safe place, and it kind of burns down.
Yeah.
That's significant.
That's
trauma.
very intense.
And the stress of dealing with the insurance and all that other stuff. So that one you can kind of work through because that's replaceable. It's material stuff. And then as they were getting over that, they got pregnant. They didn't think they could, and then she got pregnant. She had a baby, but then it was a stillborn. So that's traumatic.
Oof, yeah.
I think that was last year, and then just recently her father passed away. So she's had, just one of those things is pretty traumatic. But having gone through 3 different things that are pretty traumatic too, with loss, I guess. And I was even texting her today, and it's like, look, I can't. I'm not trying to give you advice. I've never been through what you've been through, but one thing I would say to you is don't live in isolation, and don't feel like you have to get over it by yourself. So with you having personally dealt with significant grief and stuff like that, I guess what would be some advice that you have for her to the sun's going to rise the next day. Life keeps moving forward, but that grief is real. And I personally have had to deal with grief like that. It's one thing hearing someone else's story, like I've listened to a lot of podcasts, military, veterans, PTSD, but like someone who's been in real grief.
Yeah.
I guess what would you say to her?
Feel it, girl. I think grief is, it's an interesting animal because it takes so many different shapes and sizes, and how people experience it is so different as well. But one of the things that I wish I did more of, even though I thought I did a lot of it, like I wish I really grieved my mom. I think I was too much in survival mode because I was going through chemo still, to fully grieve that. The grief, I think, has, even 14 years later, like it's still in me, and I don't think it will ever go away. So I think one, like giving yourself a lot of compassion for where she is on her journey, where she can be really kind to herself, to recognize like her capacity. Because I think in American culture, we have this concept of like, oh, somebody grieved, here's 2 weeks off. Okay, now we move on.
Yeah.
We very much are like a suck it up kind of attitude.
Well, her response was like, hey, thanks. I need to get my together. And that, no, you don't actually, because you're not meant to do it by yourself. And that's the mindset of military guys. Like, especially if anytime they've killed someone or seen killing, that's traumatic. And that's why they come home and they drink themselves, because they haven't dealt with that.
We all, I mean, this is bigger, but like we all have numbing techniques of how we're not feeling what's actually below the surface.
How do you said she has to, how do you feel grief?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I mean, it can look like so many things. I think your intuition around not doing it alone is really important. So like having community, whether that's your friends or maybe you're joining a grief group, but where you get to be witnessed in your grief, I think is so important. Working with a therapist, but to feel it and really be witnessed. I did a lot of journaling during this period. I mean, I still do. I think journaling is a really helpful tool to meet your own voice, meet your own pain, meet your own emotions, meet just what's present here. And, but I think if it's just witnessed by yourself, you're not getting that like social empathy from somebody else that actually can be like real healing balm. So I think that is a huge piece, to reach out for support. The thing is, I noticed like when I would try to talk to my friends about it, some of them would freeze because it's a scary subject. People are afraid to say the wrong thing. Or like I know I had so many people actually fall out of friendship or fall out of my life when I was going through this storm of chaos because they didn't know what to say, you know? And I think for those friends, I would always say something. Like, it's beautiful that you're checking in on your friend, checking in to say, hey, you don't need to do it alone. Or, hey, you know, not even just like, how can I support you? But like, hey, can I come over and like make you a meal? Right? Or, hey, I surprised you and got you a massage. Like, doing those kind gestures for your friends who are grieving is also a beautiful way to support them, so that you get to feel seen, and it's vulnerable for the people who are grieving, because sometimes it comes off as like something's wrong, you know. Oh, I need help, right? Because in America we have such an individualistic mindset. So being in community, you know, allowing the emotions to be in motion, like, again, letting them be moved out of you is so important.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm still practicing.
Yeah, I'll send this to her, and I know she's listened to a few other ones, but yeah, I mean, death is a part of life, but the timing matters as well. Like when an 80-year-old person passes away, it's like, oh, that's beautiful. They lived a good life. But when
And 80's young now.
yeah, but yeah, when a young person, are you aware of CrossFit games?
No.
Are you aware of CrossFit?
Yeah.
So they have
Like competitive CrossFit.
They have every year they have games.
Okay.
They're all the best of the best. And yesterday they lost. It'd be like NBA playoffs and losing a basketball player. They lost an athlete yesterday. And you know what a triathlon is, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the first event in a triathlon?
I think the run?
Swim.
A swim. Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So you swim and then
That
you do
swim
the
was
other.
last. Okay.
And so they did a 5K run, and then he went into the water and he drowned. Not right away, but like towards the end of the finish line. And it's like, well, that's because you don't swim second or third. Because what if you're tired? If you've biked and you've ran, or if you've done anything, swimming's already hard, right?
Yeah.
And then if you're tired, like, you're done, right? And so it's sad because at that age, he's in his early 20s, full of life and vigor.
Right. Prime shape. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's sad, and they're moving on with the games. But when someone young passes away, it's very different versus, like, I did a podcast.
Goosebumps, because I think that just is like points to, we never know, you know, car accidents, freak accidents. My grandmother got hit by a car when, I don't remember how old she was before I was born, but like, you know, like these things happen.
Yeah. And then I was doing a podcast with a guy, he's in his 60s, and he's like, you know, my goal or my desire is to grow old with my wife and we pass away where no one cares about us except for our own family. And then, because he knows death is inevitable, it's coming. And so when that happens in your later years, you just know that's part of life.
Yeah.
I think it is. It feels harder when you're younger.
Well, I know like midlife, you know, 40s, people in their 40s is when they start to lose their parents, you know, if their parents have been, knock on wood, healthy.
Yeah.
And that becomes the first time in their life, typically, that they've had to deal with death, maybe besides a grandparent when they were younger.
Yeah.
And it rocks them really hard. And I totally get it, you know, and I look back at this rupture in my early 20s, not wish it upon anybody, but I also look at it with gratitude that like I gained all of these life perspectives at a really young age that get to inform how I choose to live.
Yeah, you appreciate your health. I've noticed people who, like, I've never had life-threatening injuries, but because I had injuries in my 20s, I now appreciate my health a way more. Because I'll talk to guys, I talk to a lot of older guys, and they'll be like, man, not to like toot on myself, but they're like, the wisdom you have to take care of your body, usually people don't do that until they're like 50 or 60.
Yeah.
And they're like, the fact that you are thinking about that now, that's because I had injuries in my late 20s that then helped me change the trajectory. Like, oh, this can be taken away. Oh, I'm not as invincible as I thought I was.
Yes.
And so I don't wish that injury, but it did force me to appreciate my abilities, and so I definitely appreciate them a lot more.
Yeah,
now.
you make lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so I don't know how much we want to get into that, but it's like we grow through pain. So there's a guy named Alex Hormozy. I don't know if you know. It's funny because he hates therapists, but in reality, he just self-therapizes. So he takes all their tools and just practices them on himself. He doesn't need to go to a therapist. And he's like,
which is very, yeah.
He's worth a lot of money. He's a business guy, whatever. But anyways, he's like, it's interesting. If you want certain characteristics, usually get those characteristics, you have to go through hard things, right? If you want to be patient, if you want to have discipline, if you want to, so it's like, if you're trying to build this avatar, they usually have to go through all these things. And as a parent, you want your children to turn out a certain way, but they usually have to go through some bumps and bruises to get to that level.
Yeah.
And so for me, the way I see that is through sports. Because I don't deliberately want to go beat up my child, right? But how can he have some kind of conflict that he has to overcome? And I haven't been able to find that outside of sports or bullying or whatever. Like I don't want to cause conflict or whatever to my child, but sports is a way where they learn if you're down so sports is a way I've found that they can get some of those ideas or principles or practices so that they can develop. But it is something to think about. If you want to become a certain character, just like if you're playing a video game and you're trying to build that character, they have to go through things. They're usually not fun. And if you can do it at a younger age, you have appreciation for it, then you can help other people, and that's probably what led you to your current career. But yeah, that's tough going through cancer. Obviously, how long of the process was it for you to get fully healed?
So chemo was 6 months long, and then I entered remission, which means like they couldn't find any traces. And after that, I went back to school to finish my degree.
What was your degree in?
American culture. From the University of Michigan. And I then just was like, get me back to Buenos Aires, Argentina. So I finished.
Can I pause you there?
Yeah.
What is American culture?
It's a great question.
So the reason I ask is it's like, it's Olympic time. So like when the Olympics was in Beijing, when they did like the opening ceremony, you could see all the culture. I've been to Asia and you can see the culture, right? The food, the flavor, just everything, right? And then my buddy, who's actually a Ukrainian, he just did a trip to Europe with a few friends, and I was asking about the trip and he's like, it wasn't that great. I was like, what? And because he's like, they do the same thing that we did in America. It was just interesting because I was like, okay, when you go to Europe, it's usually history of like, because there's buildings that are really old or whatever. And so then I was thinking about, what is American culture? Like, what is it like when you go to different Asian countries, you can be like, oh, the Philippines does this, Thailand does this, Malaysia does this. But it's like, it's just interesting that you said American culture. So like, what is the American culture that when I think of American culture, like when we're exporting it, I feel like we're exporting McDonald's, we're exporting unhealthiness, we're exporting greed.
Yep.
So what is the good thing about our culture? Again, I love America, but do you understand the point of my question?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say like I studied the good of our culture. I think I studied so American culture was really a mix of like psychology, history, sociology. And that's why I loved it, because it was this mix of like all these different human studies. And I knew I thought I wanted to go to school just to study psychology. But when I took sociology classes and when I took American culture classes, like I loved the context, the nuances that we were talking about, anthropology classes. So, I mean, one of the most prominent classes that sticks out in my mind was learning about how the railroad system that was developed in America actually contributed to the explosion of American culture, because that started to bring about like the circus. And that then brings in this whole thing of like how we treat animals. And then that brought in like,
It's interesting that you remember all that. Because if you ask me in any of the college courses I took, there's not one course or there's one experience I can tell you about, but I don't remember.
well, yeah, it was this,
What's in my
well, because it was like, oh, this is from the birthplace of Hollywood.
Yeah.
And where hip hop came from, and where, you know, and how the radio was a huge effect. And then the TV, you know, like, so just thinking about, wow, all of these things. And then in one culture,
So there's more history than.
well, it's history, but it was also culture
Yeah, yeah.
class. So then it was also like I wrote a paper. Again, this is back in 2009. I wrote a paper about how texting was affecting romantic relationships.
Yeah.
You know, so it's you know, how technology influences how humans connect. So that's the American culture that I studied. I agree that when you go abroad and you think about American culture, yes, a lot of it feels like it's Hollywood, it's fast food, it's consumerism, it's speed, individualism, yeah. And those are some, I would always joke of like, I got a American culture degree to decide I don't want to live in America, because then I moved back to Buenos Aires. Yeah, so I moved back to Argentina then, and I bought a one-way ticket. I was teaching Pilates and meditation to the expat crew. And I was very much committed to helping people feel good in their bodies after just going through this process of healing my own body and learning how to practice mindful eating, like listening to what my body needs to feel strong and healthy during chemo, learning how to move my body more intentionally, learning how to talk to myself in a kind way. This is where I started my meditation practice when I was sick, because I needed something that could help me manage my anxiety.
Were you ever exposed to like a faith or religion?
So
a lot of people will turn to that when they're in a time of crisis.
yeah, it's a beautiful question. I was born and raised Jewish, culturally Jewish. I did have a bat mitzvah, but I didn't feel connected to the religion. So it didn't feel like I was going to get my answers by going to temple or reaching out to a rabbi. I really felt that the answers were already inside of me, and it was about slowing down to connect to them, and also to connect to this higher being. Like, I definitely do believe that there's a higher being in the world. All of the, in my belief system, all of the gods being like one energy force, you know? And so my practice of meditation was really this place to like send my cells when I was sick, like healing, loving energy. Because I realized like I can eat shit, or I can eat bad things, and I can eat a lot of things that won't help my body get stronger to fight the cancer, or I can do everything in my possible mental, emotional, social, physical to give my body strength to fight the cancer. And that's what I chose. And so when I moved to Buenos Aires, I was like, I just want to help people be in their bodies and feel really good and strong.
Yeah, it reminds me of when you've gone through something yourself and now you want to tell other people. You've seen the burning building, but if other people don't know it's there, it's hard to get people to be aware of that.
Yeah. And you can't tell somebody that their building's burning. You know what I mean? Like, no one, again, that's where somebody has to learn the lesson for themselves to be like, ooh, something's off. Let me take a look at this.
Yeah.
You know,
it's usually some kind of traumatic experience that then forces them to realize. And you know, it's interesting as a father thinking about my kids. It's like, okay, one of the things I can do is just mimic or have them see my lifestyle. And so one thing, you know, I like what you said about movement, because that's one thing I want my kids to fall in love with movement. So I don't necessarily use the term exercise with them. It's just all exercises is just a framework, right? And just like calories in, calories out, whether you believe in it or not, it's a framework that we created because it helps people understand, like, if you eat this many and you overeat this many, then you will get this size, right? So they're frameworks that man has created to help us navigate life. But for me and my kids, it's like, okay, I want them just to have healthy habits, and they as a parent, you know why you're doing those things, but they may not know why. But then for them, they're going to build in, like, oh, dad exercises or works out this often. He goes running, so they go running with me. My daughter rides her bike when I go running, so you just build it in. Like, I could go do by myself, and it may be faster, but it's like, no, my daughter can come ride her bike with me while I'm running, and now we're having that bonding time. She's able to talk about her day. Because sometimes she'll only want to do things with me, and she doesn't want the boys because that's her time. So I incorporate that stuff. I do try to do as much as I can, because it's like, okay, let's go do that stuff.
Yeah, I love that, because I think a lot of the times, and we were talking about this before we hit record a little bit, of like, parents can make life only about their kids, and then stop caring for themselves, stop prioritizing eating well, or stop prioritizing moving their body, because it's like, I don't have time, or I'm so tired, it's not worth it. But when you model those behaviors for your kids get to see, like, oh yeah, it's important to care for myself. And it's important that people care for themselves, because when the I cares for themselves, then it's also connecting to the we caring for each other,
Yeah.
Which then has a bigger ripple effect.
Yeah. So hopefully after this, you're like, yeah, I want to have a kid, because there's a lot of, you can do parenting poorly, but if you do it, like, I don't know if I said this to you over the phone the first when we talked, but I want this particular friend, and I don't have this friend that I want, which is eager about life, loves to learn, enjoys exercising, movement, and just always willing to try and learn new things. And I have a friend that lives in Tennessee, but when they live that far, there's only so much you can do. And then I have friends that are local, but maybe they only do one of those things. I was like, man, I don't have this friend. Then I was thinking about it. I was like, well, I have 3 boys. I can create one of them to be this, it's more jokingly, but it is interesting, because it's like, you as a parent, you can, if I'm a person that sits on the couch and watches TV all day, then my child's going to mimic that.
Yeah.
But if they see dad doing this, and they see dad doing that, and they see dad constantly learning, constantly engaging, constantly just progressing and learning and stuff like that, then maybe one of them will be like interested in doing that. And so it's I'm joking, but at the same time, it's like, if you do a good job with parenting, then when your kids have a choice and they're adults, then they can choose to want to be friends with you.
Yeah. Well, it's like, there's psychology around that, like the mirror neurons, right? That we pick up around the people that we spend most time with. We pick up on those habits, or those beliefs, or those characteristics, so not only who your family is, but which you can't choose all the time, but learning who you surround yourself with, it has a huge impact on our well-being.
Yeah, I mean, I have friends with kids, and they can't wait to get away from their kids. And that's like, well, it's because you didn't do a very good job raising them. But if you do a good job raising them, we love our kids. We love them so much, we want to spend as much time with them as possible. It's for a short period of time, and then they're gone. Or not. A lot of parents I talk to don't have that same type of experience with their kids, and it's like, well, we didn't do a very good job raising them, unfortunately.
How much time do you spend with just you and your wife, like on your relationship versus on
we can talk about marriage. So we definitely could do better in that department. We go through different seasons, and whether for us, like, I was talking to my mom about this, because my mom, she's been married, I don't know, 50 plus years. She had 6 kids, and her, like, the way she did it was, they never separate. It was always everything was always a family. So, like, some parents want to, hey, we're gonna take a trip away from our kids, but she's like, we never saw that. Because we did this together. Like, we brought you into this world. We're not trying to get away from you. So to answer your question, I know we could be better about more time together without the kids, but it's like, in this season of life, our anniversary is coming up in October, and so we're thinking, like, oh, maybe we should go like at our 10 year, we're like, we should do something. Then COVID happened, and so that didn't happen. And then it's like, so you can always do more, but we also know like this is a season of our life where we don't mind including them. Like we don't mind including them with our stuff because we actually enjoy our kids. Because again, other cultures, you go to African cultures or whatever culture, it's all integral.
Yeah.
Often do you see the parents saying, "Bye, kids, we're going to leave for however long."
Yeah.
So you should work on your marriage. And is it healthy to take time away from your kids? Maybe. But if you actually enjoy your kids, then they're just a part of everything we do.
Yeah. And I think to your point, I mean, again, not being a parent yet, but like, there's no should.
Right.
You know, you get to do what works for your family. And I feel like there's always more we can be doing in every part of our life.
I could be a better dad. I could be a better husband.
Which is exhausting to keep saying to ourselves, you know? It's like, yeah, you're doing, sounds like sufficiently, you know?
Yeah. Until, one question I did want to ask, we're kind of past that point, but when a pivotal point in people's life is when they are leaving the home. When you were 18, 19, did you know what you want to do with your life?
When I went to college when I was 18, I originally thought I wanted to be in the fashion industry because I had done all of my like summer internships in the fashion world in New York. And, you know, I loved like the glitz and the glamour and the like models and then I realized, I think after my rupture of life of like, oh, if I had chosen that path to be in the fashion industry, what it would really look like is looking at Excel documents, you know, of like what merchandise is being in and what's out, right? And I was like, that's not how I want to be spending my life.
Yeah.
And so I had a realization of how much I love people, and that became more of my wake-up call of wanting to work with people in some regards. And that's what I did when I moved back to Argentina, was teaching Pilates and meditation.
So how long did you live there after you graduated college? How long did you live in Argentina?
Was there for a little over a year. I had moved, again, I bought a one-way ticket. My intention was like, I'm going to find...
What do they speak Spanish over there?
Yeah. I was like, I'm going to find my Latin lover, and, you know, who knows what's going to happen. You know, I had fantasies of like falling in love with like his family and maybe moving down there forever, right? Like my mind went to many different directions. And 6 weeks after moving down there, I met my now husband, who is from Seattle. So not my Latin lover, but my lover. And we met at a bar on St. Patrick's Day. And we had this.
What was he doing there?
He had moved down there in 2009 to travel, and then he did a master's program down there, and then was working for a Seattle-based company managing Latin America weather technology. So he was working at that point, and we were down there having this relationship while I'm teaching Pilates, kind of growing my community within the expats and trying to get my foot in the door with the Argentine community. And here I thought my Spanish was going to get better, but it didn't, because, you know, everybody I was surrounded with spoke English. And then he at that point was ready to move back to America. And I was like, whoa, I just got back here. Like, I just went through hell. Like, I am living here because I miss this place and I love this culture. So he decided to stay another year with me, and then...
Did you guys move in together and all that?
So we stayed another year, and then we talked about moving back to Seattle in...
How soon would you say you started dating from when you met him?
We started dating right away. Like, we had this intense connection, and then we started dating, and then he actually...
So let's get more detailed, because I just saw a thing recently where people don't know how to date anymore. Like, it's a thing. They're actually teaching it in Harvard. Like, this is how you date. So let's get into the minutia of that.
So we met. We met at a bar on St. Patrick's Day. We had this like magical evening together. We were dancing on the dance floor, very connected. And then we went on our first date. I want to say like
Who asked who?
he asked me.
How did he know that it should progress to the next, like,
I
did you
mean,
leave a
those were,
signal to him where you're like, hey, this
well,
is
I went back to his house that night. We didn't do anything. We didn't do anything too advanced because I very much am like, you have to be with somebody for a while before you have sex. You have to make sure they're tested. Like, so very much again, this body is a temple.
Yeah.
It just went through a lot.
in that first night, did he know much about your history? Did you go over all that?
No.
Okay.
I think though the next day it might have come out a little bit. At that point, again, my hair was growing back. I lost most of my hair, so it was pretty short. And I'm still learning how to like feel like me, you know, in this.
So it sounds like you had really good chemistry that first time together.
Yeah.
And so that sent him signal.
That sent signals. And he says when I left, he said to his roommates, I'm in love. I was still like, who's this guy? You know, like interested, intrigued.
In your back mind, you're like, he's not Latin though.
Well, I was just like, yeah, what's his deal? You know, meeting American abroad, I was kind of like, like he's saying he's from Vashon Island in Seattle. Like, where are those places? Like, you know, as a New Yorker, I have no idea what's outside of New York City. But we connected, and when he asked me out for a date, he gave me 3 choices. It was like to go to a movie, to do something, or to go to a jazz bar. And so I chose a jazz bar. And we went to a jazz bar and had a date. And then I think like got gelato afterwards. I'm also skipping a huge part that like after our first night together, we ended up spending like the whole day together too. Like we just had fun. We were connecting with each other. And from there, it just kind of snowballed.
So I think about that experience. And I think about even my experience with my now wife. And the experiences that young adults are having today is because, like you even hinted back to that, so everything's via text. If your relationship starts online or through an app or through texting or through technology, you're missing out on that initial chemistry that you build. So like with my wife, we got to know each other over summer as friends, and we went on camping trips. It wasn't just me and her, but all these people. And so we got to see each other with no makeup. I didn't obviously, but just we had experience physically with no technology.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why people are having issues today is because they're relying on apps. You're not getting that chemistry on, the dating profile says you match with that person. That's very different than you actually having an encounter with someone.
Yeah. Smelling each other's hormones. Yeah.
And so you're not going to get that intense chemistry if you swipe on an app and it says you're going to meet, because all these young people, like the fact they have to teach a class in Harvard and how to date, it's like, wow, we've really missed the mark, because that should be so natural, built into.
Well, our whole social structures have changed, right? Like, especially with the pandemic, like those kids learned how, like on a Friday night, I know this from a friend who has a younger daughter who's, I guess, now 16, but like she would be on Snapchat in her room on a Friday night.
Yeah.
That's her social, versus like my social at that age was going to a friend's house, was going out to the movies, right? Like, so it's just, it's
so from
different.
Step 1, you're missing that initial, because then the people that are communicating through internet or technology, you're not getting those signals and feedbacks.
No, we're judging each other from very superficial information.
Or you and I, mine was over a summer, yours was over one night. You have that experience one-on-one. And it's like, that's what I would probably tell young people to do. It's try to get off the technology, because you're not going to get that initial chemistry. Because then it's like, if it's built off of technology, you're not going to know, should I follow up with this person? Should I do that? For them, it's a numbers thing. If I touch enough people.
Or like meet them virtually, but then meet them in person, and like really be open to those first dates, and then giving also people a second chance because people can also grow in you. Like there was something with my husband or my now husband, but I was like, there's something that's like really intriguing me. That's like, I'm curious to still learn more about him, and not just continue to snowball. And we've been together for, again, like 13 years, married 5.5.
Yeah. So, you stayed there for 2 years and
Stayed
then
there for a little over a year. Yeah. And then he was like, okay, I'm ready to go back home to Seattle. And I was like, okay, I'm ready to take the next step in my career. And I was exploring, I knew I wanted to work with people. So I was like, what does that get to look like? Do I want to go back and go to be a therapist, become a social worker? And I was doing all these informational conversations with people virtually and in person in Argentina. And I found out about coaching and about life coaching. And I had never heard of life coaching before. And again, this is over a decade ago where like,
now
it's not prominent, but now everybody knows what.
Everyone and their mom can be a life coach.
Yeah, which is a whole other story we can get into. But so I found out about it. I talked, and I was like, this is what I'm meant to be doing. I felt it in my body. I just was like, this is what I'm here on this earth to be doing. This is why I survived cancer. This is like how I get to help people. And I was researching coaching schools, which is a whole other thing that you have to figure out because the coaching industry can feel very scammy and what's that sales market pyramid schemey,
Right.
And so I was like, what is actually a credible school? And so I went to something called IPEC, which I really loved. And they had a school in Seattle, a location in Seattle. And so I was like, okay, great. I'll move back to Seattle with you, go to coaching school. We'll both kind of take
How
the
long
next.
was the school?
It was a year-long program in person and virtual. And it was like a year and a half because you had like, extra assignments to complete. And then you're an accredited coach, but then you have to do a certain amount of hours of coaching to then get the International Coaching Federation credentials.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to go the route of credentialed coaching, which I suggest people do if they want to become coaches.
Yes.
And my husband was like, okay, we'll move back. We'll, I'll spend some time with my family. We'll reestablish some roots here. And our plan was to kind of be here for 2 years. And then we've been here for 11 years now. But yeah, that was the kind of start of, I didn't realize once I went to coaching school that I was starting a business. I just had felt like this is what I'm meant to be doing. Mm-hmm. And didn't really realize like, oh, I have to learn marketing. Oh, I also have to be my bookkeeper. Oh, like, I have to learn like, what's my like client, like sales, like client acquisition funnel, like all these things, which I was like, so that was a very interesting process in starting my business.
All right. So I did a little research on this, just the concept of life coaching, but I'm curious to you, like, if you could give me the elevator pitch on what life coaching is and some of the basic principles to it, and then we'll maybe go into it more. But for someone that's maybe interested in it,
yeah,
because again, part of this podcast is to talk to people from all walks of life, different careers. So for someone that is interested in life coaching,
so coaching is like a huge umbrella, yes. Right? There's like sports coaching and there's coaching, and the coaching world gets very much, it can get mixed in with like mentorship and consulting, but it's unique. It's its own thing. And so life coaching is just one pillar within.
What's the broader
term? Coaching, I would say.
It's like you have fitness, and then under fitness, you can do certain different
like things. I know a lot of personal trainers call themselves a coach. That like is always interesting to me, There are people who are executive coaches. I call myself a mindfulness coach, which I can talk about why I do in a moment. There are people who call themselves fulfillment coaches, career coaches, like new mom coaches, right? Like there's so many different kind of labels around, which more so speaks to like people's niche and how they're using the techniques, but the techniques are all essentially the same. And so coaching, how I define it, is it's about helping people hear and feel and get to know their own values, their own thoughts, their own emotions, their own self, so that they can start to connect the dots in their life and make more intentional choices. So as a coach, my job isn't to like tell you this is what you need to do. I'm not here to give you information. Instead, I'm here to ask you empowering questions, to hold space for you, to help walk you through exercises, to help challenge you, to help you build some tools to gain your own answers. Because if I was to say like, hey, this is what you need to do to become happy, like those are my filters and experiences and thoughts. I might offer you suggestions, but it's really like when you connect to your own wisdom, that's like where true alignment comes up. And that's where people actually get to live a life that feels good, that they love, that feels like, yep, this is my life. This is Josiah's life, So, and I differentiate like coaching from mentorship, where a mentor might say like, you know what, when I was your age, or when I was interested in starting my business, or when I was interested in starting a podcast, this is what I did. They'll share their experience with you, which again has its own value, but it's very different from coaching. So coaching, again, is all about asking those questions, holding the space, knowing like you are the captain of your own ship and where you want to go in our work together.
Yeah, when I was doing some research the other day, it's like with therapists, they're more looking at your past to present, and with coaching, it's more present to future.
Yeah.
Which was an interesting distinction.
Yeah, which like some therapists will, push back at. I talk about with my coaching clients that like sometimes we'll dip into the past to learn from it.
Past is going to affect you. Like if you've been traumatized as a child, like you probably should address that.
Yeah, and I'm very clear with my clients around what we're working on together, because sometimes there is a line where a client needs to work with a therapist before they can start working with a coach. And sometimes I do have clients who work with a therapist and we work together at the same time. So it really just depends.
Will you then try to connect with that therapist then?
In few situations I have, but it typically is also not necessary unless there's like some overlap happening. But typically I'm pretty clear about my clients of like, okay, great, you're working with your therapist on this. Great, we're going to work on like this aspect. And of course, like, it intertwines within the human, but being clear about those boundaries is really important.
All right, so here's some fun questions. So I would say in the health fitness space, there's some core pillars. There's a lot of different ways you can go, whether you want to be a runner, weightlifter, Pilates, yoga, whatever. A lot of different avenues.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of them have some similar core pillars like movement. Don't eat too much, right? So it's easier to say those things. In the life coaching space, what are some core pillars, no matter whatever way you want to do it, that are, it's not maybe 100% factual, but like, hey, this is what we kind of loosely all agree on?
Yeah. I would love to tell you I've memorized all these, but I don't have them memorized. But because I'm an ICF, which stands for the International Coaching Federation accredited coach, there's a whole list of, I'm blanking on the word that they use for it, a whole list of guidelines that as a coach you agree to hold these standards. Mm-hmm. So it's like ethics of how you get to navigate and hold space for people. Mm-hmm. And those are the pillars that I would say that guide my work.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say constitutes as the good life? Because I think most people want the good life.
Well, I think the good life is individual. Like, I think that's...
But isn't there some commonalities that you see?
For sure. I think we all want to be happy, right? And what makes us happy is, again, all like, I think, unique. Under that umbrella, what does that mean? I think people want to feel fulfilled from a sense of purpose. They want to like be contributing to society in a positive way. They want to have their needs met, you know, basic needs of food, shelter, well-being. I think most of my clients want to feel a sense of like calmness and confidence. The good life for them would be a sense of having meaningful relationships. For me, the good life is like health, you know, health and being able to connect with other people and be in beautiful places with delicious food.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, life, like the more I do these podcasts, it's, you saying life is very varied. So to say you need to do it this way, it's like, well, dude, that's not true because we can have so many different experiences,
Yeah.
and it's okay, and giving space for that to happen. And it's also, as a parent, after we talked, I was like, you know what? I am a life coach to my kids. No, I don't know if a lot of parents see it that way, because it's like I'm preparing them for adulthood, and I should take that role more seriously because I'm creating this product, and I'm at some point they're going to go out to the world. If I did a poor job, then that child is going to become an adult who's then going to make poor decisions. That's then going to be not as beneficial to society. Like if you raise a bratty kid and then they become an adult, just what kind of effect are they having on society? So that's made me more aware of that, as like we wear a lot of different roles as a parent, and some parents do it well, some parents don't, or they just, you know, the schools will do it, the doctor will do it, whoever else will do it. I'm just here to make sure they don't die and
Right.
food.
Right.
But it's, yeah, after our initial conversation, it just made me think about that a lot more. It's, no, I'm, one of my hats or roles is a life coach to my kids, so that when you have kids at different ages, it can be easy to try to parent them all to the same age. So I have a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old. It can be very easy and lazy to just treat the 11-year-old like he's a 6-year-old, and it's like, no, it's not fair to either one of them, because the 11-year-old who's almost 12, he's going through different things, right? And so
Has different needs.
yeah, we need to, as a parent, be like, oh, okay, this is the time where hopefully we've done a good enough job where he's starting to make decisions, and maybe they're not always the best decisions, but it's okay because you're giving them space to fail and hopefully fail forward, and just being more deliberate on, hey, he's getting older. We don't have to beat him up every time. And when I say beat up, not physically, but just, we don't have to give him a hard time when he makes a mistake, because it's like, no, we want him to make a mistake now. We don't want him to live a perfect life now, because life's not perfect. Life is going to beat you up. You're going to have to make decisions without having all the facts. And so giving him space to do all that, and then letting him come to us and think through that.
Yeah.
And so with us, we play basketball, and he has a difficult time of, again, my kids are a lot more emotional than I was, which is great. Because I feel like I'm not emotional enough. And so I don't want my kids to be like me in that area. But in a game, if we're scrimmaging or whatever, sometimes his emotions can get so much that he'll quit. He'll not quit the game, like leave, but just, he can't play at a high level. And it's like, if it's hard for you and we're playing 2-on-2 and we all like you, what are you going to do when it's against a team that doesn't like you, that actually wants to beat you? And, you know, talking through that with them, as far as like, hey, you know, yes, you're feeling a certain thing, but how do we work through that? Or you probably don't follow Olympics.
Like growth mindset. You're helping him have a growth mindset.
Yeah. So it's fun because it's like, I get to do that as a parent.
Yeah.
And they don't have a choice. They have to, they're stuck with me.
Yeah.
They can't fire me. When they're 18, they can fire me. But, and so, yeah, that's why I love being a parent, because it's like, you get to be with these people.
Yeah, it's so curious to explore, and I'm curious to see how, when I become a parent one day, like that difference of how much is it nature versus nurture, right? Like how much is your kid gonna teach you who they are, who their soul is, versus, you know, you feeling like you have to shape them.
It's both. You can be a domineering parent, and you have the helicopter parents that are watching every little thing they're doing. And now as the kids get older and they try to bring conflict to me, I'm like, go solve it yourself. Like, if you want me to solve it, it's gonna suck for all of you. So solve it yourself. So they know if there's conflict, don't bring it unless like it's serious.
Right.
It's like if it's just bickering, it's like you guys need to
Yeah.
fix it yourself.
Yeah.
Um,
Gifts of siblings. You get to learn how to
yeah. And I
negotiate and
I grew up
navigate.
more like an only child, and because my sibling, the next one was 6 years older, and so that was rough. For my kids, they all have each other. They can do all that, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But is there any case study where I know we don't have no names or anything, but just experience that you've had with coaching, where someone came to you and you're like, because working with me, we were able to do this and this was the outcome. So I'm curious of if you have some case studies of people that you worked with, and by teaching them certain things or whatever, this was the outcome that they had. Or I guess what type of person generally would, I think everyone could probably benefit from a life. Like when I did the podcast with the therapist, she was like, if I could say it, everyone should use a therapist. And it's like, yeah, a life coach is someone that's deliberately thought about life and now has a framework and has some tools to then help you so that you can be, I think it's just living with more intention and being deliberate.
Yeah. So that's why I call myself a mindfulness coach, because not only am I a meditation teacher, and I have training in that, I kind of combine the two, because really meditation for me has been this huge practice that has helped me learn how to hear and feel myself more.
Hey, let's define meditation. What is that? And what are you doing? What is that act?
So, I
like a religious person would pray.
Yeah, so meditation, the type of meditation that I do, the meditation that I'm trained in, is called mindfulness-based meditation. I did my training at UCLA's Semel Institute of Neuroscience and Human Behavior, so it's very secular, and it's all about paying attention to our thoughts, being able to notice sensations. So it's like having an anchor.
Are you trying to, because I've heard it say you're trying to empty.
No.
Okay.
So to me, that is a myth around meditation, because our minds are so loud. We don't live, in the mountains isolated from noise and life. Our minds are always going to be full of things, whether it's hearing, a neighbor's footsteps upstairs, to hearing cars outside, to the countless thoughts that are going through our mind of planning what's for dinner and, I needed to send that email. So it's about being able to know and label the thoughts in our minds, but learn not to attach to them. So when we grow our mindfulness muscles, which is something that we can cultivate and strengthen, just like as if we were to go to the gym and lift weights, our mindfulness muscles get stronger when we meditate. And we can meditate formally, and we can also practice meditation informally. So meditating formally is maybe what people think about when they think of meditation, like sitting on a chair, lying down. You can do walking meditation, but it's about slowing down enough to be with each moment as it's unfolding with a sense of curiosity and kindness. So a lot of the times when we slow down to notice, like, oh, right now, like I'm feeling my throat a little tickly and dry, or I'm also noticing like I have some pressure here because I think I need to go to the bathroom. Like there's sensations, like our body is talking to us. So can we note it, but not go into the story of it, right? I just did. I was like, oh, this is telling me, but that is what we get to cultivate in a meditation practice, is paying attention. Because our mind...
You're saying we have a lot of thoughts. And one thing I heard was you have a lot more negative thoughts than positive thoughts.
Well, we have what's called in the brain a negativity bias, which means we are prone to look for what's not working, what's wrong in our environment and in ourself. And that's a form of protection, because, eons ago when humans were growing up in nature, like we had to keep scanning the environment of when is a tiger going to come out of the woods and eat us, right? So we have to be aware, and we're looking for that danger or what's off as a form of protection. However, we want to, now that we live in a society where those basic needs of safety aren't necessarily threatened as much, it's like, okay, we now have more capacity to kind of train our mind to think about other things, right? And that's why we're able to be more creative, and we can spend our time contributing and learning about science and creating, X, Y, and Z, and right, like we're growing our society. So I think paying attention to our thoughts is really important. And the part of meditation and mindfulness is this idea that we can be curious, because how often we hear a thought and we think it's fact, right? But our mind is a meaning-making machine. It's always going to make up shit, right? Like right now, looking at your face, I could be like, oh, Josiah's mad at me because he's not smiling, right? Like our mind just loves to make up stories based on our past, based on our conditioning, based on all these things. So when we can slow down enough to pay attention to the thoughts and the sensations, we're building more connection to be able to discern what's truth and what's not. And the more that we meditate, the more that we grow these mindfulness muscles, the more space we create between our thoughts. So it's not just like thought, which I know my brain used to feel like.
Slowing that whole process
you're
down.
slowing it down. So it's like thought. And then when there's more space between the thoughts, I then have more choice. Do I want to keep thinking this thought, or do I want to choose a new thought? I'm noticing this emotion arise. Do I want to grab hold of this emotion, or can I just notice that this motion is in motion and it's flowing out of me? I mean, I can keep going on about this because
this is interesting.
Yeah.
This is something that kids could also start learning as well.
Oh yeah, and meditation has started to, secular meditation has gotten into schools. Yeah, I was approached the other day by somebody who shared that there's a school up in Shoreline that has a mindfulness program for kids. Susan Greenberg, I believe her last name, is a very prominent teacher who's created a whole curriculum to try to get meditation into schools.
Something you alluded to earlier. Do you know who Dr. Joe Dispenza is?
I do.
So you probably agree with some of the things that he says. I was listening to one of his books, and he was talking about quantum theory, and it was basically putting the science behind thought and things occurring, because a lot of people call it manifestation, and he's trying to say, no, there's science behind it.
Yeah.
Because everything's connected.
Yes.
And he gave an example of how he told his daughter, what do you want when you go to college? And she's like, I want all these things to happen. He's like, okay, now you have to mindfully think about these things. And there's things that are like, it couldn't have just accidentally happened. And so she's like, okay, I want to go to Europe, and I want to go to this country, and I want someone else to pay for it, and I want to live there for this long, and just all these things that were very exact. And then an opportunity presented itself that didn't meet all those things, but it got her to Europe. And she's like, look, I got half the things I wanted. And he's like, no, is that what you truly wanted? She's like, no. He's like, well, then pass that opportunity by. And then sure enough, that thing that she wanted did occur, where the school was like, oh, actually, we're funding this program. We'll pay for you to go live there for 6 months. So it's not your whole summer. So literally everything she wanted, she got. And so that was just an example of like, there is, when you think about thoughts, it's like, it's not physical matter, but it affects physical matter. And that's what he's doing and I think that's part of what he's teaching people. It's your thoughts do affect
your reality,
physical world.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to think about, because it's like, the reason why I like the physical world is you can be very scientific about it, because you can be like, if you go into a deficit, you will lose weight. You just have to, right? If you exercise and you eat protein and you have a calorie surplus, you will gain muscle. But in the mind world, there are principles, but it doesn't always play out as easily. I feel like maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, I do know Joe Dispenza's work very high level. I come from a different form of meditation. if people are familiar with John Kabat-Zinn, he wrote a book called Wherever You Go, There You Are, which was a book my mom gave me when I started chemo, because I said to her, I want to start meditating. And she was a big meditator already. So like, again, I grew up with all of this stuff. And she gave me this book. And when she had passed and I was sick, I was reading this book as if she was talking to me. And I was learning how to meditate through this book and through my practice. And not only are we learning how to work with our mind, which is really powerful, but meditation is also a way that we can start to regulate our nervous system. And
he talks about that in his book too.
Yeah.
People curing themselves of cancer. Because you kind of alluded this to earlier. It's like, I'm speaking to my cells, and it sounds science fiction-y, but you're like, no, it's all connected. We just have done such a poor job. And he talked about this in the book. We've done such a poor job scientifically because we've separated the brain from the body.
Exactly.
And he's like, no, I want to bring those two together because they're
one
affects
linked.
the other.
Yeah.
And science they separated it because it's easier to be like, do this, and you'll get this. And in the mind, I'm sure there are rules and there's principles, but they're not as clear cut. Mm-hmm. And so that's why they probably separated it. Because as a scientist, you want to be able to show what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
You have a theory, and if I do this action, I'll get this response. But it's not as clear, I think, in the mind.
Yeah. Well, a few things with that. Going back to coaching school for a moment. So going back to my coaching school, the principle around coaching was on this energy leadership framework. And it was all about, stemmed from work of like Einstein has this quote that everything is energy, match the frequency of the reality you want. And it's true. Like when you say the word lemon to yourself right now, what do you notice?
Think about lemons.
Okay. Do you notice anything else?
No.
Okay. When I say the word lemon, I start to notice my mouth starts to kind of pucker. Mm. Like my tongue starts to pucker a little bit, like it's biting into a lemon.
Maybe because I don't like lemons, so I don't
feel
that reaction.
Yeah. So try it out with your kids. See what they experience. But that's just a little ism to show, like, when we think about something, we can also feel it in our body. And that's what I mean of like the words that we say to ourselves have this energetic ripple and effect on us. And so a lot of my coaching clients come to me because they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling stressed, they're wanting more work-life balance, they might be feeling burnt out, and they're wanting to feel in their skin again. They're wanting to feel confident. They're wanting to feel like I'm on my path. They're wanting self-trust. They're wanting healthier relationships. They're wanting careers that feel really aligned to their purpose. They're wanting to be able to balance their time in a more effective way. They're wanting to be able to make space for their own well-being, right? Because they can prioritize working 12-hour days and not prioritize moving their body, right? So figuring out all of those alignments. So I have clients that have come to me, like I've had a client that came to me, she was running an non-for-profit. She was so burnt out. She was getting health scares. She was losing her hair because of how stressed she was. And those were just some signs and signals of like, okay, you can keep going down this track, right, of what you're doing, which is obviously not working and creating a lot of harm in your physical body, and your body's talking to you. Or we can make some changes and adjustment from an internal perspective as well as external to help you find more alignment. And what she did after our work together was like not only build better systems within her business so that there's like less actual stress, but then also internally working on how to manage that internal sense of pressure that she's not doing enough, because that sometimes becomes the crank that actually creates the most harm. Is we think that we need to keep doing more, work harder, get more done, and then we're never feeling like enough. We talked about it earlier. Yeah. So that's kind of high level what I do with my clients, and I call myself a mindfulness coach because it's all about bringing awareness to your life, helping you get out of autopilot so that you're saying to yourself, like, what really matters to me? What are my values? Like, how do I want to spend my time? What food can I eat that actually feels good? That's not just because like this person's telling me I need to eat it, right? Or this is what I should be eating. It's like we start to turn off all the external noise that we hear in this world and help people turn up the internal wisdom that is already here in the mind and the body.
Yeah, that's really good, because it's like we send people to school for 12 to 16 years, and then they actually don't know anything about anything.
Yeah.
They don't know about physical health. They don't know about money. They don't know about
Life skills.
life skills, and then they don't have the ability to
Invest.
tap into themselves, and which is kind of what you're doing. And it's like those are the things that are important. And guess who is spending money on all that? All these big marketing firms, right? Because they understand if we market a certain way, it's going to tap into their psyche, which will then get them to buy this and this product.
Yeah.
Because they understand us better than we understand ourselves. And if anything, we should be learning in school is how to understand yourself better, and then how to take wisdom and knowledge from other people and incorporate that into your life.
Yeah, exactly. Make those intentional choices.
All right, I know we got to wrap up, but what is something you giving advice to like young girls about, hey, this is what the next 10 to 15 years will look like? What's some helpful advice you would give to them that maybe would have been helpful for you? And then what's something, I don't ask people to have regrets, but what's something that you learned later in life you would have been like, man, that would have been helpful to know have understood when I was younger?
So what is advice I have for somebody who's like 10 to 15?
We'll do 18 to 22.
Oh, 18 to 22. Okay, advice for somebody 18 to 22 would be to travel. Like, leave your bubble. Go learn, go explore. I think that is the best thing. Like, gain tools, gain wisdoms, gain expertise, but like from a practical perspective. And knowing like getting that corporate job is always going to be there, or opportunity to go back to school will be there. But travel if you can, you know, really let yourself see how big and beautiful this world is. And we can learn so much from each other, so much from different cultures.
And then what's something you picked up? Because there's things that I've learned now in my 30s that I've been like, man, that just would have been useful to have understood and implement in my 20s.
Invest. Start investing in your Roth IRA, like even if it's $10 a week, $50 a week, whatever you can do, just put that money away, save, and not from a place of like, don't spend and scarcity, but like, be smart. I see younger people these days spending so much money on Starbucks, spending so much money at Target, like just wasting away money on these like quick dopamine hits. And it's just like, use that money for good.
Any last thoughts?
I'm choking here, but I do. If people are interested in getting a taste of meditation or wanting to explore the world of coaching a little bit, I have a free 5-day journey.
Yeah, I'll put it in the link.
Okay, cool, that people can check out.
Yeah.
And what are other thoughts? Gratitude, man. Like, I'm grateful for this life. Like, shit can be hard.
Yeah.
But to find those moments of good in our day, or those bites of delicious food that we can just savor and like really let them in, because they help us build so much capacity to navigate this world, because it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
So lovely to connect. Thanks for having me.